Welcome to Portals, where we endeavor to bring to life perceptions and practices that help us make sense and resiliently lead through the shift underway with purpose, balance, and well-being. We are seeking to grow the community as organically as possible. If you are enjoying this content and getting value from it, would love it if you'd subscribe to our YouTube channel and help us get the word out by sharing this content with friends you think will find Portals valuable and enriching. Welcome to Portals of Perception and to the second episode of Current Openings, what the world doesn't quite get yet, where David Price Francis and I focus on what is current and conductively leads to new openings. Today, we focus on natural laws. What are they and why should you care? David is the co-founder of Energy Worlds together with his partner Joanna, and he is the author of Partners in Passion and Go with the Glow, and also the author of The Tales of Dr. Wu, A Journey into Truth. He's a spiritual teacher and a transformation expert helping individuals, couples, and groups improve the quality of their lives and relationships. David, welcome.
Hey, thank you, Aviv. Great to be with you again, and I look forward to this current openings too.
Yes. So in our first episode, you and we developed a brief for current openings, what the world doesn't quite get yet. And the theme we developed in that first episode was the story of the three etheric sisters, sister exoteric, mesoteric, and esoteric. And this exploration reflected on truth in a new way, because the point we made in that initial episode was that mesoteric truth is communicated differently to the exoteric point of view or opinion, as you pointed out. And esoteric is communicated and accessed different to both. And then you made an important point alongside the idea that we are briefing ourselves to try to be relevant to all three sisters and be inclusive. The point you made was that in every three-step systems, you can at any one time be in two out of the three. You can never be in all three at the same time. So you can be in the present looking at the past, you can be in the present looking at the future, you can even be in the present reflecting on the power of now, as Eckhart Tolle tried to share with us, and same with conscious, semi-conscious, and unconscious. And what you started to paint there was really a natural principle and a principle or a natural law, and I thought that would be a natural bridge to then invite us today into the discovery of natural law. So how would you want to lead us into an opening about what a natural law is and why should we care learning and appreciating what natural laws are?
That's a great place to start. Let's take the theme you just mentioned, the exoteric, the three sisters, exoteric, mesoteric, esoteric. And let's think, example at school, exoteric, a natural law was introduced to me with the idea of an apple falling on Newton's head and the discovery of gravity. So that's an exoteric tale, which a person can just say, oh, gravity, yes, I get that. Gravity, apple falls on head, fine, what's next? The mesoteric view would start to study Newton's laws of motion. So mesoteric view would start to study Newton's laws of motion. For every action, there's an equal and opposite reaction. And that would get more into the mesoteric, more into the in-depth about the working of, say, that particular principle. I think with the esoteric, we come to another understanding, which is that we can only develop as human beings in accordance and in alignment with the workings of natural laws and principles. So if we actually want to develop and raise the level of our vibration, which works by natural law, then we would need to be in harmony with, working with, understanding those laws and using those laws for the purpose of our own personal and human and essence development. So that to me would be a journey through the three. It's a long way away from an apple falling on someone's head.
Well, so let's say, as we agreed, I will pause you on certain terms and certain framings that you offer so you can clarify, and then we'll get back all the way to the apple, and then we'll develop more of the natural laws. But the way you frame development and the way you speak to the idea of raising one's vibration, some people will have great difficulties and will consider that to be in the woo-woo land. So can you give us an exoteric, mesoteric bridge, please, to what you mean in this framing of development? And I know that we will devote specific time for that in the future again, but just as a placeholder, please.
Well, it just so happens that before the call, I brought with me a prop. I suddenly had this idea I should get a prop. So I have here a piece of string, and the natural laws can be demonstrated, the law of raising the level of your vibration through a piece of string. Let's say this piece of string is 24 inches long. Now, if we take a guitar string, if I pluck this, and you can see it's vibrating, it will release a certain level of vibration, and that is a law. So if we take exactly the same piece of string and reduce it down to 12 inches, keeping everything else constant, that is the size of the string, the temperature in the room, the atmospheric pressure, and we pluck it, it'll double the rate of vibration. And that is a natural law. Without that, we couldn't play the guitar. So guitars, all musical string instruments, I call it string theory, all musical instruments are based upon the law that if you halve the mass, you can double the vibration. So how this then works in human development, if we take it through the three, the exoteric might be just taking note of the fact that, oh, you pluck it and it makes a noise, and you reduce it, you get a higher note. The mesoteric will start composing pieces of music based on that idea. So getting guitars and making melodies. The esoteric will say, hold on a minute, what's the meaning and purpose of this? What does this actually say about human existence? What does it say about our life? What does it say about our place in the universe? And start to get to the idea that if we change the mass of what we're dealing with, so if we can reduce the mass, we can increase the vibration. Now, to get inside that, we need to start opening up what kind of impressions we take in and which impressions have greater mass or lesser mass. But an obvious example at physical level is if somebody is running on a massive amount of junk food, it's going to affect the rate of vibration they can have mentally. It's interesting, we call it a fast. When someone goes on a fast, we don't go on a slow. We fast, and it speeds up our mental process. Imagine someone's got an examination, like a test of some kind, so they go and eat a large meal beforehand. And what that actually does, the stomach then needs to absorb a lot of the energy for work at that point, and reduces how fast our mentation can go. So that's why people tend to reduce physical intake before engaging with mental work, as an example. So there's certain very definite principles by which human life on planet Earth is based. And if we can get to understand those principles better, we can start to work in accordance with those principles and literally reduce the length of our piece of string and raise the level of our vibration. And if we're in a different circumstance and we need to or want to, we can lengthen our piece of string to go into a lower vibration, because we are like a musical instrument and we can range up and down the scale. Thankfully, that's a human speciality, and we can do that.
So you made there 3 moves. Move 1 was to actually explain your string theory of vibration. That's very advanced physics there, right there.
Only a piece of string. Yes.
Yeah, right. Very advanced. The second move you made was to therefore recognize that anything we do, it's almost as though you're saying we are a musical instrument, we are a guitar, and anything we do, we're having a conversation like the two of us are having now. You're working on a mathematical problem, you're working on a relational problem, you're working on a dietary or political or organizational problem. You are plucking your strings, the strings that are relevant to that, and actually the music or the performance or the solutioning or the intelligence or whatever you may be able to bring to bear is an expression of the energy that you run in that application system. And we're mixing metaphors, but in this context, the application you're running is the string that you are applying. And if you choose to upgrade and elevate your frequency, you are operating from a different level. Therefore, you'll likely lead with more intelligent, more sophisticated, or actually more graceful or easier solutions, rather than be overwhelmed by the details. For example, if we apply it in that direction. So that's how you made these 3 or 4 moves bridge from development to raising your frequency range in the sense of the potential in any domain you're living into. Am I missing any of the moves there?
I think at the level of esoteric, it would be, as an example, playing music with understanding of the principles involved and the effect the music will have on the human organism, which there isn't so much. This is starting to be approached more now in the world with the idea of healing, sound healing through music, using tuning forks to tune in the different energy centers in the structure. And so the esoteric would be grounded in being able to play a certain vibration that would actually reach a person's emotion and is guaranteed to do so. The mesoteric would be like having a script of somebody else's music, not understanding the cause or where that music comes from, but you can play the notes. And the exoteric would be like, wow, if I pluck this string, it makes a noise.
So the esoteric musician will step into the room with a group of people. They may be grieving, they may be are inspired by an idea, and they will be able to recognize the mental, emotional, communal space they're in and produce the music that's coherent or will serve a particular need, including cleanse the feelings, the energies that need to be cleansed, such that they can enter a different space. That would be an esoteric service through music.
Yes. And they'd be able to play, in that sense, play the music of the room, and it would never be the same twice. It would never be exactly the same music on another occasion, because the balance would have changed. And so the necessary vibrations to balance out the atmosphere in that room would be slightly different.
Okay, so now this is what happens in current openings. We are on the path to explore natural laws, and oh, by the way, we bump into a whole other episode that we thought we will do in the future, and it presenced itself right here with us, and we will come back to that. But so let me get back to your initial apple dropping on Newton's head. So you're still about to introduce what actually is a natural law and why we should take interest. Let me introduce right there the gentle resistance of friction in saying that the difficulty in introducing natural law today is that we have many people They would get even upset by the idea, even before they understand that you're about to invite us to recognize natural law, not in the Platonic or Aristotelian or Thomas Aquinas tradition, but in a different sense. You're not talking about a natural law in the sense that the law of equal rights is not something that the legislator need to make a law. It comes out of nature or God or whatever you tell that story. That's not, you're not against this idea, but that's not the context within which you are going to lead us into natural law. You are more, you're about to invite us to recognize the laws of nature as natural laws. The laws of nature that are governing upon us. And I will still say there will be those that will get upset with you, upset with us, because they defy the idea of gravitation as something that's governing to them. I mean this metaphorically, but also actually literally. And if they do happen to jump off a tall building and be surprised that gravitation will meet them in a painful way when they meet the ground, they will tend to blame somebody else for the injustices that made them fall from a tall building, rather than to recognize a natural law. I'm exaggerating or making the point that this is a post-modern, post-truth, post-everything time where many claim to have the right to construct in their head, with their circle of friends, the natural laws for them. And you're saying, no, there are actually some natural laws. So please help us resolve that challenge. What would you say to them?
So that there are universal laws that are governing at planetary level. And what that means is they can gather with a circle of friends and create a social construct. And that is within the permission. So humans have a certain permissions within which we can gather, within which we can operate. If we choose to try and fly under our own, using our own kind of equipment, unlike a bird, we're not able to. Now we're clever. We have use of a very advanced brain, more so than anything else on the planet, I believe. And that therefore means that we can manipulate with the laws. We can operate inside the laws to create machinery, to then enable ourselves to operate within those laws, but we're still operating within the laws. Let's give a very close-in example that is an obvious example, which is that we need certain kinds of intake into our human equipment. We didn't make ourselves. We are here, and I believe we are within a certain blueprint or design. 2 arms, 2 legs, a head. We're within a certain design feature, and that within that design feature, we need certain kinds of impressions, certain kinds of food. I call it 5 fuels to actually live. So we looked on it in the introduction. We take in through our mouth physical food, that's the most dense, the most matter, liquid food, and then through our mouth and our nose, we take in gaseous food or air. Now, if you were to block someone's air and say, even if I were to say, I'm going to take a deep, I've decided not to breathe, right? So I take a deep breath and I wait. Well, yes, I might get to the point where I actually sort of black out, but then I'll wake up breathing. So there's a law in there which says that the human is designed to breathe gas, designed to breathe air. And if someone says, well, I can make my own laws, me and my group of friends, we can do without air, thank you. So, and they run that experiment, they're going to discover that it doesn't work, that they need the air that the planet provides. And that is a governing universal law. And so we need physical food, liquid food, gas or air food, and also light. So the sunlight, increasingly, like each of these is a whole dynamic of healing. So from nutrition, healing work, working with physical food and liquids, to working with different breathing modalities, like in different kinds of meditation, focusing on the breath, and then also light therapy. So working with the energies of light and changing the colors of the lights. And then to me, the fifth food, the alchemists were expressing a system of universal laws with the angels, as they called them, of earth, water, air, fire. And then the quintessence, which to me is the most interesting one. Quintessence simply means by Latin the fifth essence. So the quintessential of something is the fifth power. That's energy. That's direct electrical impressions, energy impressions. We listen to a piece of music, we're having a quintessence experience. We're looking at something with our eyes, we're bringing in the energies via our eyes through our portals of perception. We're bringing energies in and into our brain and into our whole system. And that is a vital understanding for human development, because according to what we eat, what we drink, the light we expose ourselves to, and the impressions we take in, that is going to be the energies that we have to work with. And so that's where the governing laws, you can't work with an energy you don't have. It's like to say to folks, well, think of a color that doesn't exist. And we can't do it because we are we're responders to the universe. So although a person might like to think, well, I'm a creative person, well, they're creative within the permissions of universal government, universal laws. So we have to breathe, we have to do certain things and engage with certain activities to be able to continue to live. And then from that platform, we then look at what we choose to do. And so very often we tend to take for granted the most fundamental features of living, but we have far more in common. The whole human race, 8 billion people, has far more in common with each other than we have differences. So that to me is the beginning of the dynamic of universal law. And we can see it through all three levels.
And underlying the recognition that there are those 5 foods or 5 fuels is that the human is a living system within a living system, and therefore the human system is designed to receive. There is always an intake at each of those 5 levels, and there is a release. There is an incoming and there is an outgoing. If you don't get rid of what your digestive system no longer needs you to retain, you run into difficult problems. The same with air, the same at the other levels where you actually need to clear the impressions from the day from your brain, which is partly done through sleep and through dreaming. So the recognition that the natural law that governs all 5 fuels is an intake and outtake. We cannot, an organic living system within a larger system is operating with this reciprocity of inhale and exhale, and that would be the case in just any living system. And so 2 questions and see where you want to lead. If we stayed just with this first, because part of your premise is recognize that there are natural laws, universal laws, recognize that they are governing upon us, and thirdly, recognize that by learning to appreciate these and getting into harmony with these, we do well. It becomes an enhancing factor for us. So is there anything else you want to say on this factor 2 and factor 3, which is we are governed by the laws and it's enhancing for us to actually appreciate that? Or would you want to lead us into another example of another natural law?
Well, let's try and do both together.
Yes.
So let's see that with that inhale and exhale, there's through all those foods, there's a third process, which is what we make of it in the middle. So we're inhaling, we're exhaling, and we're breathing. And while we're doing that, we are in a conscious, semi-conscious, unconscious process about whatever it is that we're doing. So this is the amazing thing to me with human life, is that we can take in the energy of a carrot, and we can turn it into poetry. It's like someone who's a poet. They can take in something physical, it combusts in the body, and they're writing poetry. It's like even Beethoven needed a snack, and that kept his equipment going, so he could be expressing himself through his music.
I bet there is the poet that even just the impression looking at a carrot, somebody wrote a poem about a carrot before they actually consumed it just by looking at it. I bet we will find that if we Googled for that. But your point is, yes, the process in the middle.
We'll find artists who definitely arrange bowls of fruit and then paint pictures of that, right? So there's a third happening with the human, which is what we then make of the experience. So there's one of the most obvious laws, and there's so many different therapies even based on this, but let's go to the idea of polarity, that we live in a bipolar world. And therefore you can see that literally because the planet has two poles. This used to be expressed in the division symbol in mathematics as a dot at the top, North Pole, dot at the bottom, South Pole, equator in the middle. So there's a principle of division, and amazing how without division, there's no multiplication. So there's esoteric math, like how does a person get to be from a one cell being into like eight stone of human, or 140 pounds of human? Well, by a process of division, cellular division, by which the cells multiply. So we have this very interesting balance between inhale, exhale, divide, multiply, addition, subtraction. If there's two apples and someone has two apples and I reach in and take one, well, I've now plus one apple, they're minus one apple. In the material, and this is why we get territorial struggles between countries. Both countries want the oil. And so it's a territorial struggle, which is more of the material working with that same law, which is for one person to get something, another person takes it, the first person seems to have lost it. So we get this expression like gain and loss, or winning and losing. But in the energetic realms, again, the same law, but it works by multiplication, division. So what am I getting at here? There's a tendency in organic life that for every clockwise action, there's a counterclockwise action. And this is something I read a report from a pharmaceutical company recently, where they said what they're looking for, we tend to call them byproducts. But the scientist was explaining that for every clockwise action they see coming from their new developing drug, they're looking for what's the counterclockwise action, the action that's going the other way. Well, that's to me that it's an esoteric principle turning up in a mesoteric laboratory. It's that Newtonian idea, for every creation, there's a reaction, or for every positive action, there's a reaction coming the other way. So right now, if we look at, say, the realm of politics, we can see the same natural law, universal law playing out, mostly unconsciously. And this to me is the big feature, which is human development works by becoming increasingly conscious of these laws, and therefore being able to use them towards a development and growth purpose. But let's take currently in politics, you get someone who's claiming to be on the right, and then someone else who's on the left. One is said to be more conservative, which is trying to hold things as they are, and the other is more, you could say, liberal, trying to open things up. Well, if we knew the color system, we could say, well, this one is more actually red. Red tends to bring things to a point and hold it together. The liberal is more blue. And when we look at American politics, we actually see those are the colors applied to Republican red, more liberal blue. One is going like this, one is going like this. So as human beings, we don't need to attach ourselves to either. The smart thing is, on a particular day in your life, do you need to take a conservative action about something? Do you need to be contracting something? or do you want to be expanding something? But it's folly to say, I'm going to go with the expansive principle no matter what, because it won't always work. It's also folly to say, I'm going with the conservative principle no matter what, because there'll be occasions where that doesn't work either. So the smart person is neither with the red nor the blue, but they're in the middle, which would be, let's say, the color white. And they say, well, I need a bit of red over here, some conservative over here. I need some expansive over here. And they're not tied into either. So we move from being bipolar, which is dualistic, which is polarity, which is different, it's given different names, the idea everything has its opposite. Well, there's always a third vector. I call it Trinity consciousness, coming out of a third place, and then being able to work with both.
So before we expand into whatever you mean by Trinity consciousness, let me try and narrate you've made 3 or 4 moves there.
Yeah.
Move 1 is you're observant, and you started by reflecting through observation that there is the inhale and exhale action, and there is the clockwise and the anti-clockwise, and there is the contraction and expansion. So that's move 1, becoming aware that we are actually surrounded by expressions of polarities, of dualities. In a sense, stepping into a place of recognizing that is a natural law that expresses itself in physics, in relationships, in politics, in business. Yes, we either have a bull market or we have a bear market. So anywhere you look at, you will see those tendencies. That's move 1. Move 2, you suggested, was that the tendency is often to actually become unconsciously enrolled in one of those things. So you're either enrolled into a conservative point of view or a liberal point of view.
Yes.
Or you are enrolled into the greed of the bull market, or you're enrolled into the panic of the bear market. In all of those examples, you in a sense lose your capacity to choose and your capacity to lead sometime against the mob mentality or against the trend. And so your third move there is recognize, become self-aware, become a practitioner of the polarities and dualities in your life, such that 1, you're observing those, 2, you see where you tend to get caught up in one persuasion or another, and then you say, thirdly, that's the critical move, actually you can extricate yourself out of the binarism of life and discover different moves to escape or release yourself from polarities. 1 is the one you described, which is there is a third vector in the middle. In other moves is to look at the 2 and integrate them by seeing them as part of a continuum, as part of a bigger picture. A third move would be to lean into 1 but carry some of the other in, so you diffuse, you disarm. That's the disarming move. And we probably want to devote a full separate conversation to slow down the discovery of the 7 or 9 disarming, integrating moves to polarities. But you led us into this point to assert, here is why we should become observant and study the laws, because when we do, it changes our experience, changes the mode of engagement with just about anything else that we encounter.
And we're governed by them anyway. So do we choose to be conscious and work with them, or choose to be unconscious and have them govern our life anyway? Because, like it or not, we're working within the permissions of those laws. So if someone can become, or the more aware, as you say, the more aware we can become about the laws, the more we can choose the position that we want to take. Let's give another example, which is the idea of positive thinking. This one is really quite contentious because people are like, think positive, think positive. And then I found myself saying to someone one day, well, you know, most of the damage on the planet is being done by positive thinking people. He looked at me like what? I said, yeah, the guy who's whatever, say, selling plastic. He wants to be the number one salesman. He's going to courses on positive thinking. He's going to be number one. He's making the difference, and he's increasing the volume of plastic on the planet. But he's a positive thinker. I thought I should start a school of negative thinking, you know. But negative thinking has got this connotation. What's got been put with the word negative is the idea of something that's toxic. But actually, positive is to say yes to something. Negative is to say no to something. So we need both powers. I mean, imagine you've only got the power of saying yes, and you don't have the backup power of saying no. Well, then you become a yes person. If you only have the power of saying no to things, then you become someone who's a denier of almost everything. So we need the balance of the two, which means we need to occupy, as you said, that third vector. And our willpower is based upon our won't power. You know, so the power of our yes is based on the power of our no. So we need the balance of the two.
That would make a great episode title, The Power of Negative Thinking.
Yeah. We need it. We need
totally.
It in its real sense, yeah.
Because in the actual sense, when you say yes to something, it means you've said no to 99 other options.
Yes.
Which is why the exhaustion of this postmodern space with the noise and the cacophony of highly commercialized million medias chasing your attention is that even unconsciously, just going about your day, you end up needing to say million times every moment no to everything else that's trying to gain your attention, just to be able to proceed to whatever it is that you want to get to, going through the gazillion advertising messages surrounding you. So in effect, what part of what we are seeing is the exhaustion of the capacity, the negation capacity, which is actually a potent energy in the system. The capacity to turn your back on something is powerful and is part of a life and part of a development life. And we are suffering the exhaustion of that power and part of the mental disorders that we see all around us. I'm not saying that's the main cause, but one of the influences, one of the triggers is exhaustion of your negation capacity.
Yes, yes. So being able to position oneself inside understanding that law of human life, that we have a power of positive and negative. We could say taking a position and taking a negation, that we have the ability to accept things, you know, with one hand and deny with the other. That puts us in a command and control position where we can actually be, a self-responsible, self-decided, self-determining person, because there's so much that's trying to hypnotize us on a daily basis. So even that word hype, you know, and hypnotize. And by hypnotize, what I'm getting at is that when an advertiser is putting something to you, they want you to see that as the most important thing on the planet in that moment, because your focus is meant to go right there.
Well, it's worse now. It's not just the advertisers. It's the sophisticated, smart engineers, software engineers in all the large platform companies in Silicon Valley, using us and the brainstem wirings and what it likes to respond to against us, which is an unequal power, because this is an example of a system that found a very savvy way, as better articulated and described by Tristan Harris and others, and by the Social Dilemma movie a couple of years ago, in the way that they describe that, essentially recruiting you against yourself, your early primitive brain against yourself. That is certainly a system that's wired against you tapping and unlocking the higher systems that in part run on pacifying or putting those lower systems into the at rest or pacified mode.
And we have a depth, we have a special, like a superpower. It's a good way to describe it. We have a, because that's very current. We have a superpower that they can't, beyond their ability to hypnotize or distract. And that superpower is the depth of the power that we can actually muster inside ourselves. So they might be able to hypnotize the conscious brain in that sense. But when we click into our semi-conscious, unconscious, which for me is a major part of why study and try to connect with the natural laws, because the laws as they exist, the universal laws, not made by human, the universal laws are an expression of how creation works. If we were to get into religious language, it'd be an expression of how God works, or how the source or the cause of creation works. So it's like studying the signature. You know, we may not be able to we'll leave that alone, but we can look at the signature, and the signature is the laws. And by engaging with understanding, but coming into harmony, as an example with that third vector, we don't need to be attached to what it is that's coming at us from other people. We can actually start to say, hold on, I'm here by divine permission. I did not come here from Google. I did not come here from Facebook or any government organization. A human being is here by a divine permission. So let's study the laws, or and with every law there's an energy. So by trying to understand the actual laws that manifest here, we connect to the energies behind those laws, and we start to connect to our human superpower, which is there's an old saying, the whole world will stand aside for someone who really knows what they want. Well, if we really get into the depth and the power of a human life, then it makes the algorithms and all of that social media stuff look at, it's weak, because it's only running on a weak voltage. But if we can get into the esoteric, then it's running on a very powerful amperage and voltage. So the closer we get to the core of that three-part system that you laid out, the greater the power. So when we're in the esoteric core, we can burn off much more easily these lower hypnotic influences that want us to think about whatever they're putting out today. And in that, I very much include the news media, the constant messaging about what we're meant to be thinking about, which usually is very temporary and is of no, in longer term of our life, is of very little account. Because, I mean, who remembers who was the mayor of a particular city, 20 years ago? It just doesn't matter in the long term.
The mayor probably remembers he was the mayor, but and their spouse. But so the two important elements to decoding what you offer there, and then I'm going to try and give another example of a natural law. The first is that when you talk about depth as a way to release oneself from the capture of the agents of the attention economy.
Yes.
Our friends at Google and Facebook and the like. I have friends there, I love them, but I recognize the friends and clients. I recognize part of the underlying challenge that we're dealing with those platforms. So when you talk about depth, one of the other things you are asserting, which probably deserves a whole episode by itself, is the recognition that the human is not one thing. You are not just a one thing in one particular time. you are, if you like, you are a mansion with many different chambers. And the moment you can step out of the shallow, that is also analogous to you saying, I'm actually going to step into a different chamber in my mansion. And when I do, whatever it was that I was captured by over here, I didn't fight it. I simply appeared, chosen to move into a different chamber in my mansion. That capturing agency has no access to. So that's going to be a very important development technology for us to explore on another episode. And the other thing which I will just seed when you talked about, what you said was laws, they're connected to energy, and I, in my mind, what I saw was the expansion of your string theory, or it's not string theory, but string visualization, which is that whatever we are discussing as natural laws in the way they manifest themselves in the theater of life, those are expressions that are actually tethered by a string to something that is indeed a universal principle that comes through all the layers and expressions of life. And what you're saying is, through that, there are the core pulsating energies, if you like, the invisible infrastructure that supports the larger ground of living and life in all its many expressions. That's how I understand what you meant, energy appearing in each of those laws. And when we choose to be observant and practice the awareness in a way, rather than being governed by the energy and the law, we become participant, and we begin to pull the levers of these systems through our conscious awareness, only to then transcend, to actually have those play with us, through us, somewhat unconsciously, consciously, which is the idea of super consciousness, that is something that's working with us in harmony, not by consciously choosing, which is the slow functioning, but in the sense of being in harmony, in symphony with a system that is operating inside our process.
Very nice. So that would say that the reason for it in that way, studying the laws, is to make connection to the energies that they are connected to, so that we can express the energies through ourselves. And we're designed, so in that way, they're conduits of connection. And we're designed to, we can bring through ourselves different levels of energy and energetic process. So when we're at a high level energetic process, they show this in religious art as halos, as fire coming around the person, as a third eye in the center of the head, holding out the hand, and there's a crystal in the hand. And all of these are designed to demonstrate something's going on. Something's going on with that person. And when you scan, as I have, many, many different religions, it's amazing how the patternings appear in each religion. And what they're demonstrating is that by whatever method, they've been able to make a connection to a higher universal energy. And then in researching the background of each religion, you find that they're working with what I call natural law, but maybe another name would simply be universal laws connecting to universal energy. And very often it's like the Tao, it's been called the way. The Cherokees called it the way, which is finding the way to connect to those universal energies. And the most effective way that I know of is not through there's many, many teachings in the world, but the direct method is into understanding the laws that we have the evidence of all around us. So we don't need to go to the library and rely on a book. We can actually, let's say, look at a tree and go, wow, how interesting. It pitches up through its trunk, and then there's a spinning of the branches. And there's a relationship between a boat moving through the water and then the way that the wake travels. So if we're going to go forward in our life, we're going to be causing a wake. Interesting, we become awake. We have a wake coming out from our forward movement. And so there's always laws that go with energies. So I work a lot with this in relationships. It's like when two people decide to form a partnership, a relationship, well, they're bringing their own particular energies, and they're creating a third power between them, a third field, which is neither person A nor person B. It's the blending of both, and they're both putting energy into that field. And a law of the field is that according to how you plant, and whatever you plant in a field, you just have to ask a farmer, if you plant corn, you're going to get corn. If you plant belladonna or deadly nightshade, you get deadly nightshade. So according to what we plant in our energy field, we grow the result. So if we plant energies of hatred, we're going to get a very bitter fruit. If we plant energies of love, we're going to get a different kind of fruit. And two people together create that third field between them.
And right there is again the polarity of hate and love, but also the polarity of looking at that third field that the two of them choose to create through the lens of deposits and withdrawing. So do you make more, do you expect to be able to withdraw from that field, from that account, from that joint account forever without making deposits? Or no, you're a smart investor, and what you do is you automate your deposits. You make regular deposits into the shared field of the relationship, not when there is a problem, but as part of the way of living, because you want to continue to power that field. So you become wise in the joint field that you create. So this is another example of how, in the demonstration you offer there, you practice these laws to become conscious in your life, to get better results, to get the results you hope to create in whatever space you operate in.
Yes. So in relationships, there's definite laws by which relationships work. It seemed to be like this random, do I love him, her, do I not? Are we soulmates? Are we twin flames? You get all this stuff. And I tell folks, well, psychology usually governs astrology, actually, these days, for multiple reasons I won't go into too much. But it's the I wish at the end of the fairies, the end of the story, it would say, instead of they lived happily ever after, it should be, and then the work really started, right? Because that's when the two partners work on the relationship, and then it's got a chance of lasting long term. But if one wants to work on it and the other doesn't, it's not that doesn't offer a viable third field. So even in relationships, it works by universal laws, and according to how the people behave inside those relationships. It's not entirely random.
So let me try and insert one more natural law before we end up this episode, which is the natural law that every domain, each of the, 400, 600 domains of life that you could name, in each one of them, there is the law that each domain has the core of that domain, the essence of that domain, and it is surrounded by many, many layers and enclosures. And therefore, by definition or by that design, if you want to get in touch or join or penetrate the core of the domain you're pursuing, you have to process through the enclosures without which you will not be admitted into the core. A simple example that you actually referred to earlier in the mesoteric space is, if you want to practice medicine, you have to go through the 7 years of study to process through all these enclosures, be admitted to one level and the next level until you have your license that you can practice medicine. It is also the case in many, many other domains, sometimes not as formal. And here is a little story about what does it mean to actually penetrate the core of a domain. So my mother used to represent in Israel, the top classical musicians of the world. And she tells the story that one day she's in the car driving with Pinchas Zuckerman, one of the best, most admired violin players in the world. And they're driving to his concert with the Israeli Philharmonic. And they're a little late. And so she's all stressed up because he needs to tune and warm up and all that. And they stop in the traffic light. And the car right next to them has a large dog and with the window open. So he opens the window and he starts playing with the dog. And she goes, "Really?" And she turns to him and says, "Do you not need to prepare, to concentrate, to focus, to get into the mood? You're about to perform the Brahms violin concerto." And he turns to her smiling and he says, "Brahms is already inside me."
Right. Beautiful. Yeah.
In other words, the hours and hours, hundreds and thousands, perhaps millions of hours of doing the scales and practicing the concerto freed him up to know that he is joined to the essence of that concerto, and because he already processed through the many enclosures, so he can walk on stage and the orchestra begins and he's right there. He is joined, he is tethered to the essence of that concerto. And a similar story I once heard from Al Pacino. He was still a young actor. He was still quite early in his career, but he was already known and successful. And he's playing, I think, in Boston or somewhere. He describes that he was playing in one of the Shakespearean plays. And the reviews are great and it's going well, but deep inside him, he's still trying to figure it out. And somewhere a couple of months after it's been going on every night, perhaps I seem to remember, and maybe I'm wrong, but the 76 show, he's into the first scene, and about 15 minutes into the scene, something mysterious occurs. It's almost as though he's all of a sudden experiencing that he's seeing the stage, he's seeing himself, he's seeing the other actors, he's seeing himself saying his lines. Up until that time, he was acting in his role, he was saying his lines. All of a sudden, he's able to see the whole gestalt, the whole thing coming together. Like it become, to use my language here, it becomes an activated cathedral that's connected inside out. And he is no longer acting the role. He now becomes the play.
Yeah.
And something different happened on that night. And it changed the way he continued to act and play in this role. What happened was that he found a way to enter that core, the essence of that domain, Shakespeare. He became that Shakespearean play. Again, the reflective awareness, having done the work to process through the many enclosures that cover that hidden mystery of that Shakespearean play. So then there is one more addition, which is there may be sometime a way for a person who penetrated, who was able to join a core in one domain, to arc from that core to other cores. That depends on the why, what it is that they are pursuing and why they are pursuing it. But life is limited. We only have 70 or 80 or 90 or whatever years, and you may dedicate yourself to one particular pursuit and one particular domain. But there is a way, when you penetrated the core of something, to sometime search to find the core of all cores. And what you started to assert earlier, is that one of the pathways to get in touch with the core of all cores is through the study of the natural laws.
Yes, yes. And to give one further example, someone can look up at exoteric level and go, wow, there's a rainbow. Hey, come here, folks, there's a rainbow. And at mesoteric level, they might really get into color, and they might get into discovering how different colors cause different effects with paint, and they might get into painting and expressing color. But then at the esoteric, there's the patterning of the fact, well, that's universal energy from the sun appearing on the planet, creating a sevenfold system. Now, where else do we find sevenfold systems? And it's not by chance that, you know, we look at the 7 steps of whatever it may be, and we find that there is this proneness in our human affairs, whether it's the 7 sort of steps of highly successful people, or there's many 7s, and that's at mesoteric level primarily. But right in the core, there's the fact that the planet expresses herself through 7s. And then how do we work with that? If we're going to be expressive, we're going to be expressive through a spectrum of expression. So we're going to be expressive through red, orange, yellow, green, blue, indigo, violet. We've got 7 colored lives to express ourselves through. And even in our language, you know, we can hear like a military march, and someone's going left, right, left, right, left, right, turn, and you can hear the red, you know, and someone else is more in the way of wooing. You mentioned Tales of Dr. Wu, and it's like, oh, mellow, yellow, how nice to see you, fellow. And we have this yellow nature, where you get someone going, chill, cool it. And what we literally have is cool it, which is then having a blue or cooling frequency. And we can actually, in our language and also in our postures, if I was going to be working with the nature of red, I might go red and really like bring it together. And blue would be more like blue, and actually being opening and outward. And so if we know the color frequencies and we can work with them, then we can also be expressing through them, and also recognizing, again, being aware of what's coming towards us. And this would be toward that natural law of how the planet receives through 7 and expresses through 7. So it's natural to us. And so we don't have to go through formal education. We don't have to go and sit in the classroom and somebody writes up on the board, you know, law of 7. We're able to look into nature and go, wow, there's the covenant between the sun and the planet. There's the 7-fold rainbow, and it has with it connection and beauty. It has an emotional connection. It's not an intellectual thing. It's actually very connected. Yeah.
And to just build on this, David, and make the point that this is not a study in the classroom, and it's not even necessarily in the traditional sense of researching the esoterics, is the following little story about the best nurse in the world, because it's important for me to insert this in the context of what we are describing, because this is an example of how one can enter the core, the essence of a domain in another way, through the sentiment and motivation and what it is that they're here to serve. So I once visited a friend in the hospital, and I walked in and I was there for a bit, but even right when I arrived, I noticed there was one nurse that she was very, very bright in the way she moved between the rooms. And so after a while, I stepped out of the room, and I just observed the way she was managing the whole corridor, the whole of that part of the department that she was running. And she was as close as you can describe it to when you talk about a state of flow. She knew what was the need in every room and when it was needed and what she needed to do when she got into any room. And it wasn't through her mental process. It was, she was occupying that space and that domain, and she was tethered to the emergent needs, almost always showing up half a second before something was needed to alleviate pain, to address a concern, to say a word or a sentence to a relative, to ease a struggle. She was moving like a beautiful dancer in that space, and I knew I was seeing somebody who is tethered to the core, the essence of the domain of nursing.
Yeah.
And we have people that operate like this as teachers, as gardeners, as leaders, as people that work in therapy and counseling and in all the many domains of life, people who are joined to the domain that they serve, and they have been able to join the intelligence or the essence of the domain, because they don't do it for their aggrandizement necessarily. They do this out of the love of being in service and being representational in that professional domain to offer the best service they can. And when they do, they will increasingly be like Zuckerman with a Brahms concerto, and like Al Pacino in that Shakespearean play, and like that nurse in the hospital.
Nice. And to come to what you said earlier, it's working through many chambers at once. So it's not just working through in a way the conscious chamber, the shallow chamber. It's resonating throughout. I think of it as, curious word, but it's colloidal. The person's become it, as you said, and they're with it, and it's working through them, and there's no thought of being anywhere else.
So where do we want to land this? The core premise of this current openings was about there are those natural laws that govern all systems and all domains, and we want to become observant such that those, while they govern us, we also become participant and join and can participate and pull the levers rather than be played by the laws, play the laws rather than be played by the laws. What else would you offer as a parting message for somebody saying, that's interesting, how can I take some further steps in that study?
That's a great question. I think I'd go with a practical application, which is to pick up the idea of the 5 fuels or the 5 foods and become conscious of, what am I eating? I know that's starting very, very basic, but we're processing 5 kinds of fuel. We can become more aware of this. What am I putting into myself physically? What do I know about it? And what is it going to cause? What liquids am I actually bringing into myself? Anything we bring into ourselves has an effect. So what's the nature of air that I'm breathing, and how is my breathing? Is it shallow? Is it deep? Am I belly breathing? Am I just using the top part of my lungs? This is very practical to apply. Am I actually getting out into the sunshine? There's all kinds of studies now even demonstrating that 20 minutes of sun. I know in yoga, there's the sun salutation. That was meant to be done outdoors in the sunshine, not indoors. It's designed, as long as you're actually meeting the sun and getting some sunlight, that's a sun salutation right there. So are you saluting the sun and receiving the full spectrum of light, which is very good for our brain? And what am I feeding myself, or what are you feeding yourself through your eyes, through your ears? What kind of music are you listening to? Because if you're listening to different kinds of music, they contain different vibrations coming in through the ears that affects the mind and the brain, clearly. So are you listening to, I rediscovered recently, Mozart radios, you have Mozart going in the background, or are you listening to Megadeth? You know, it's going to be a very different nature of frequency. And what are you taking your eyes to? Because it's true that we see things and we can only say no after we've seen them if we weren't expecting them. But if we're choosing a movie, or we're choosing to go for a walk, I go for a regular walk here where I live, and I've been training myself to look up Because when I look up, I see the greenery of the trees, I see the sky. If I look down, I see the tarmac, and it's a monotone, and it doesn't bring variety. So I can make a decision, if I catch it, to look up and bring in green and blue and the yellow of the sun and flowers, and I can bring that in. Or I can do a whole 2.5-mile walk just in my own head, looking at the ground. So what are we directing our faculties at, so that what are we receiving? And to me, that's the what I call the law of five, in also the fivefold element system in China. But we got 5 senses, and our education is as good as how we're using all 5 senses, and what are we bringing into ourselves, because that's the raw material we get to work with. So that's a very practical place to start, I think.
This is a beautiful place to land these current openings, with your invitation to practice awareness, to practice mindfulness, in the sense of being mindful to our intake with each of those 5 fuels and 5 foods, and choose to redirect how and what we take in.
Yes.
Thank you, David.
Thanks, Aviv. Great to be with you.
Along with our website at portalsofperception.org, Portals is also available on YouTube and on all podcast platforms, as well as social media. You can become an active member and join the conversation in community events. And you can help us get the word out by liking this content and by sharing it with your friends.